Welcome to my channel. Here, I don't just speak, but I invite you to think. Throughout my videos, I've questioned the deepest held beliefs, from philosophy, the dynamics of religion and faith, to personal identity. I ventured into the controversial because I know that only in honest, critical confrontation do we grow. My voice is a search for truth, unafraid of what is difficult. If you join this community today, you don't just watch, but you engage. Together, we open the door to a courageous dialogue, one that transforms us. Subscribe, share, and let's keep questioning, growing, and seeking truth together. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm just doing a bonus stream today. I had a fascinating conversation last night. I was trying to dual stream it, but apparently the gentleman I was speaking to, the Muslim brother Khalid, who invited me to have this conversation, a really important conversation, he uses restream, and I was not able to figure out how to get it to dual stream through because I use StreamYard. And it's just, there's probably a way to do it, and I just haven't had time to really figure out all this technology yet. And with work and everything, I've got so much going on. I didn't have time to really look into too much of this before our conversation last night. So I do apologize, because I was kind of hoping to have this posted live so that you guys could interact through the chat or something like that. But it is what it is. It was a great conversation. We touched on some really important issues. And because this topic that he chose the topic, he had invited me to have this conversation, is the West lost and dying? There's so much to unpack there. I figured we'd be talking about politics, ethics, maybe some social issues. And so we really just scratched the surface in this discussion that we had, and we went for an hour and a half. It was a very good conversation. It just flowed really organically. I do have to apologize. I don't know if my microphone is picking up some of that background noise. I've got the landscapers outside cleaning up the yard, but I do apologize if that's making some, let me have to tell them to shut that off. I'll let them do their thing. Okay. At any rate, sorry about that. So typical of the way my show goes. Something's always going on here. I'm going to go ahead and play this video and let you guys hear how this conversation went. And then I might chime in with a few comments as we go. And welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Is the West lost and dying?
Oh no, yeah, I remember that, and that's a great title, by the way. It invokes a lot of emotion, and I think there's a lot of conversation to be had around that. I think it's a very important topic. Not having had time to look into the link you sent me, it caused me to think the conversation we may touch on ethics and other social issues such as politics and things like that, which are things that need to be discussed. I think where the world in general is in a very interesting place right now, where we have to balance progress with ethics, right? So there's a real conversation to be had there.
Yeah, we're gonna go with the flow. Normally I have a plan, but often I don't 100% stick to the plan. I can imagine all sorts of interesting conversations diverging in different ways, so we just go with the flow. We'll see how it goes.
I agree. I think we could, just to make sure that we don't get too, I really have an hour, but I could make it 90 minutes if the conversation is just flowing. But I absolutely have to hard stop, which in an hour and a half, because I've got to go back to work. That sounds good.
I like it. Hopefully this won't be the last stream, so no worries if we don't cover everything we can think of. Let's go for it.
Perfect.
You are how old?
Me, I'm 31.
You have no wife?
No.
No children?
No.
And no home?
No.
But you have money? Yes.
Yeah. Some.
But not enough?
No.
If you get this done, you will have enough money? Yes.
Yes.
And you will get a wife and children?
Probably not, no. What? Huh? What?
I'm confused.
Yeah? Makes two of us, my bro.
That's what I wanted to show you. I mean, the clip makes me smile and sad actually, because I know this is like reflecting a lot of what white people particularly, and I say white because we're very frank here and people kind of know what I'm talking about. Like, there are lots of white Muslims. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like Westerners. And I was brought up in London, and white people are my people. And even if I'm saying these are, people might say I'm just criticizing, but I'm empathizing, and I really feel pain that a lot of people, especially like places like London, where people are polite, but they're not connected. They're completely separated from each other. And to throw in a stat, I think, I'm not sure if it counts for America, but certainly in Europe, I think most of the West, I did a rough check before, like last year, and I think it's still the case, that young people defined as 18 to 30 years old are not in, like 50% are not in relationships, or 50% have not had sex in the year, which is a shocking statistic for that age group. And I'm talking about men. And yeah, generally not, in long-term relationships, not having children, population is decreasing. Yeah, what's your reaction to what I've just said and what you saw in the video?
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack there, and I want to make sure that that I share time, that I don't just sit here and give a speech or something like that. So feel free to interject where you see necessary. But I was actually looking into some different studies, and I find it very interesting how in this particular clip that you played, economics was really the focal point of this clip. And that lines up with what I was seeing in a lot of studies, which kind of surprised me to a certain degree, because I thought there would have been more of an emphasis on theism versus atheism, or fundamentalism versus, more of a liberal concept of religion, that religion might have had more of an impact on these statistics. But it turns out, based on the studies that I read, that marriage rates, both marriage rates and, well, how would I say this? Marriage rates are down, and replacement rates, which means how many children married couples, families are having, are down as well. And it's happening in both the Middle East and the West. And I thought maybe it would be happening quite a bit more in the West, but it turns out it's actually happening almost all over the place, all over the globe. And the reason is, and religion may have something to do with it to a certain degree, traditionalism or fundamentalism, and the family unit type of thing. But none of that was ever mentioned in the studies I came across. What was mentioned in all the studies, what linked the Middle East and the West together, was economics. It's becoming too expensive to raise children, which once I stepped back from the situation and said, oh, well, of course that makes sense. Right now we're in a very difficult time globally, with global economics is very tenuous right now. And so I do see that as being something that's a problem, a factor. Now, how much of a problem that is, I think, is a different conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for separating the two things, because like what you think is a problem, if like the human species survives, and economically is it a problem, that's another discussion, I guess. What I would say is that there seems to be an inverse relationship between sort of the amount of money you earn and how many children you have, because it's actually richer people who have less children. I would agree. And I'll try to expand on that a little bit. So I would agree that there is a general trend downwards in terms of having less children. In the Middle East, there are lots of rich people having less children as well. Oil countries, etc. But let me put it this way: in the UK, I think something like, if Muslims are like 5% of the population having 10% of the kids. So although there is a general macro trend that you might have noticed, that populations are going down and whatever, I think if you dig deeper, you'll see that there is that trend that religious people are having more kids. It's kind of, I'm not even sure if it's really that disputed. This is why a lot of people are complaining in the UK and many European countries, and probably start seeing in America that Muslims are taking over. It's like a common thing. Why are they taking over? They're taking over because they're having more kids. Their ideas continue generationally. They're becoming quite successful because I think the mindset of being a Muslim means you can deal with difficulties, or just the mindset of being religious. Everything's happening for a reason. It's not like, oh, I just feel unlucky, this is unfortunate. It's like, oh, this is a lesson to learn from. So if you have that mindset, you're going to do really well and you're going to become successful. And I see that in the UK, even though right now I'm not in the UK. But yeah, so that's what I want to share about that. You can react, you can say something back about that, but also, did you think you can respond to what I just said? But how did you feel about the video? Did you think it reflected anything about modern society? Like that white guy saying, 31, I've got money. Even when I have money, I'm not sure if I want to have kids, because this is not about money, therefore. This guy, I mean, I know it's not real, but I don't think a movie would say something that doesn't resonate with anybody. You know what I mean? So could you read me and the video, please?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think this touches on a little bit of what you were saying, that when we do see people that reach a certain economic status, I think then we see they are actually having less children. So I think it's kind of a gradient, you know, that you need enough money to support a family, but then once you have, you know, quite a bit more money, you're considered to be wealthy, you may be inclined to have less children. And I think that actually ties into other factors. There's the people who are making significantly more money tend to be more educated, and education right now is really putting together a great effort in teaching people or educating people on the problems with the environment, climate change in particular, things of this nature, overpopulation, which, you know I get a lot of flack when I talk about things like overpopulation, because the first thing everybody says to me is, oh, well, why don't you just go jump off a cliff if you think there's too many people on the planet, right? So what I'm talking about is really, you know, we can't deny the fact that the resources on this planet are extremely limited, and pollution is a problem. The burning of fossil fuels is a problem. And the more people you have, the more pollution, the more burning the fossil fuels. It just people can't deny that. Now, there are people who deny climate science. I do run into those people quite a bit, which is really unfortunate, but they're not the educated people in general. Most people who are highly educated are well informed about what the status of the planet that it's in right now. And so I do think that they are making a conscious, even if it's maybe not conscious, but maybe a subconscious decision that, hey, having 5 kids isn't doing the planet any good. It's not doing me any good. You know, I have enough money to where I can be taken care of in a really nice retirement home or whatever. Because in ancient history, you know, a big motivation for having children, there's part of it was, of course, carrying on your tradition and having this feeling like you're carrying on your own existence, because your name is being carried on, your DNA is being carried on to your children. So it's kind of a way of living forever, so to speak, you know, or at least continue extending your life after you're gone. And there is something to maybe be said for that, at least philosophically speaking. However, what's tangible for us and what we can really wrestle with is the idea that when you get old, you know, you want to have young people to take care of you, because you're going to hit a point, if you live long enough, to where you cannot physically take care of yourself. And so this is the cycle of life, right? Our young children see the adults, and the adults are the ones who are able to get the food and build the houses and do all the hunting and gathering, et cetera, fight the wars and so on and so forth. Then they get to a point to where they become the old people, and the old people don't have the ability to hunt the food and build the houses and fight the wars. Yeah. But what the old people do, the oldest generation, what they do have is it gives us direct access to our past. So we don't have to just read in a book where we come from. We have a direct link to our past.
Are you saying that's not necessary anymore? I kind of feel like the way you're saying in the past, this is what used to happen. We used to have lots of kids, and then this is what used to happen, but we don't need that anymore. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know if necessarily by and large per se. I mean, I think the advances of modern medicine do help with that, but I think that when it comes to the wealthiest class, they don't need children to take care of them. They can have professionals do it, and they can live in a very comfortable retirement home to do that. They don't need to have their children taking care of them. Now, I don't know. I haven't looked at studies on this. I'm just shooting from the hip here, but it's certainly true that they do have the means to take care of to be taken care of through finances, as opposed to their children feel obligated to take, or not, and I don't mean obligated in a negative sense, but you know what I mean, the children have the duty or whatever you might,
that's interesting. Duty. But I just want to check, do you know that generally most governments consider us, the world, and their own Western governments consider themselves to be suffering from population implosion? That means they're not reaching replacement rate, and that's for them an economic disaster. Most governments are very concerned about that. So, for example, in Sweden, where I've got family there, they will give you 1.5 years paid leave. I think 80% of your really well-paid job there, very well-paid jobs there, just for having a child, 1.5 years off. Right, that's how concerned people are. So population, I think, are you aware that most people consider that we're not suffering from too many people, we're suffering from too few people, too few children?
Well, that's very interesting, because it takes a lot to really separate all these things, because when we just amalgamate everybody together, it's difficult to parse out, you know, where the problems, quote unquote, may lie. Because you're absolutely right. I think of Japan in particular. Japan is extremely concerned about their replacement rate. And what happens is, and there is a legitimate concern for this, because what happens is, as I mentioned, it's the healthy adults that are able to handle sustain the infrastructure. They repair the roads, they build the buildings, and they're actually the ones who make the hospitals run for the elderly people. So you don't get middle-aged people who are functional without having babies, because they got to turn it into the next generation's middle-aged worker, basically. So you need the replacement rate to sustain the infrastructure, and the governments recognize this. And so in Japan, they're having a major problem. They're actually outsourcing so much. They're incentivizing immigration into Japan, because they don't have enough middle-aged people doing the work, so to speak, and supporting that infrastructure. So there's certainly an argument to be made for that.
Cool. Yeah. I'm not trying to stick on points too much, but I do worry. Okay, so I do worry about what we call, I think you called retirement homes. Over here, or in England, we just call them old people's homes, or something, or maybe that's just me. And they have a really bad reputation. And I would say one of the most, if you want to be really miserable in an old age, don't have children, and don't have your children see you when you're old. So I don't think money or monetary or things that, money doesn't solve everything. It solves a very few, it actually causes a lot of problems as well. So you can respond to that, and then I'll just move on to the next bit. I'll try not to respond too much between. I mean, it's good to have a conversation, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I like the flow of the conversation, and I think that this topic you've picked is so fascinating, and it does touch on a number of things. We could spend the whole time talking about politics or economics or religion versus atheism or whatever. I mean, it really does, excuse me, open up quite a bit. So this might be something where maybe we could do like a part 2, or even a part 2 or 3 or something, and maybe go back and forth, maybe do one on your channel, one on my channel, since I didn't get a chance to stream this live. If you're interested in something like that, I'd certainly be one to make time for it, because I think this is a really great topic you've picked. And we may have some fundamental differences in our what we call a worldview, being that I'm an agnostic and you're a Muslim. But I think that you and I both, at the end of the day, want the best for each other and for people in general. I get that vibe from you. And so I think that you and I will have a lot of common ground that we can, once we sort through the weeds, you know. And so I think it'll be a fascinating conversation to have. So if we hammer down on one point and it takes the whole time, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, you know. Just so I'll leave it up to you. You kind of, you're the one kind of running the show here, but just however you want to do it. So now, as far as the money, I agree with you 100%. Money does create its own set of problems. You know, I grew up on the streets. I grew up in a very, very poor family, and I was on the streets when I was a teenager. And so I know what it's like to be destitute and poor. And I had a lot of problems because of that. And I had to go through a lot of soul searching and rebuild my life basically from the ground up in the shattered pieces. And once I turned my life around, which I'm very fortunate that I did that, because a lot of people don't do that, but I was able to turn my life around, refocus myself, and become very successful working from the ground up. You know, I started with when I got out of prison for a high-speed police chase, nobody would hire me to even work at McDonald's or pump gas. I mean, I could not get a job because of my record. And so what I did is I started my own janitorial company, cleaning toilets, right? And I did it with pride, and I worked very hard. And because I'm an honest person and a hardworking person, I built a great reputation. And so I was able to get into the medical industry, and all my customers and clients ended up being doctors, dentists, and things like this. And I ended up making very successful business out of that, which I was able to sell, reinvest in myself. I'm a river rat. I grew up around the ocean and rivers, love to be on boats. So normally my avatar is me riding a innovative boat that nobody's ever seen. And the reason nobody's ever seen it before is because I invented it. I got 2 patents for my design, licensed by the Coast Guard to build boats. So just a quick background of me. So I went from having no money to then being able to have enough money to pay the bills, to then getting to a point to where I actually had extra money. And when you grow up in poverty and you think to yourself, man, if I could just have some extra money, life would be so easy. But it turns out that's not the solution. It does help to be able to pay the bills is what you need. That's really fundamentally, in my opinion, where you want to be at, is being able to pay the bills. Once you don't have enough to pay the bills or have more than you need, you have inherent sets of problems that come with that. So money is not the answer to everybody's happiness. You know, I think people are really confused about that. Just to touch on the money, because I agree with you 100%. More, they say more money, more problems. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story, by the way. I'm so glad for you. I'm so happy for you that you came from like difficult times and you made it through and things are working out really well. And it's really good to hear that your honesty and, you know, the quality of your work has kind of shone through. I like that. In Islam, we consider work an act of faith. Like doing a good job is an act of faith, an act of worship even. So cool, really nice story. I said that's a really important story because even though we talk about religion and things like this, my focus is on my channel to young men and giving them direction. And I love videos where I want to show people how to be successful in life in a rounded way in terms of making money as well. That's also really important. So I appreciate that story as well. I'm gonna quickly click on this or show this verse of the Quran. Very much like poetry, so you might take different things from it, and it's not written in a completely straightforward way. So let's see if you get anything from it at all. I'll read it out. And it's related to what we're talking about here, about finding direction and stuff like that. So, and as to those people who disbelieve, their deeds are like a mirage in a desert. The thirsty one thinks it to be water until when he comes up to it, he finds it to be nothing. And he finds Allah, that is the ancient name for one God amongst many religions, not just Islam. And he finds Allah near him, who then fully pays him his account. And Allah is swift in reckoning. That's Quran chapter 24:40. What are your reactions to that verse? Does it mean anything? Can you understand anything from it? I've known this verse for so long, so it makes a lot of sense to me, but maybe somebody's completely new to it. I'm not sure what you would take from that.
Yeah, I would have some, it is very poetic. It's quite lovely to read just from a poetic sense. It does seem to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was to just steel man this, right, as an argument for say, or something that somebody presented to me, and I was to steel man it, I would say that basically what it means is that without the correct beliefs, your deeds are meaningless.
Yeah, meaningless and going in the wrong direction, and you find it, you chase short-term goals, and when you achieve them, you go, oh, Was that really worth it? Am I, do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Like it feels empty, just like I mean, I don't know if you, I'm a teacher, so I don't assume too many things. So have you seen a mirage before?
Yes, I have. Yes, I'm from a very rough. Of crazy things and
No, but a real mirage. So a real mirage is like it looks like water in the distance, but when you arrive at it, it's not water.
yes. I didn't know
Right.
I didn't know that's specifically what a mirage. I thought mirage was just illusion. I didn't realize it was
Oh,
specifically about water. But yes, I have been down to the desert in Arizona, here in America, in the Arizona desert, and yes, I know absolutely what is as the heat rise off the ground. It can look.
that's right. And so the idea, this is a specific kind of evil illusion that we're talking about, not just a general Houdini type of illusion. Here's a magic trick. It's like you're a thirsty person and you see something in the distance that looks like water and you really need water, but when you run to it and get to it, you arrive there and you find it to be nothing. That's the idea behind what this is one of the ideas behind us, that we often chase things with ideas of, oh, if I'm going to be super rich, I will be happy. I'm not saying don't make money. Like even in Islam, if you make money and give it to poor people, that's like regarded as a very big thing in Islam, like a good thing. So we're not anti-money. I'm just saying money doesn't solve things, and we often have, besides money, all sorts of other illusions of what would make us happy. And so that's kind of what this verse is pointing at. And but I'm trying to get what you're. I could go into it more, like statistically. I don't know. There are all sorts of statistics. Like I might have brought up in your channel. I think like in the West, as people have stopped going to churches, for example, they're actually getting more depressed. There seems to be a correlation. People say correlation is not causation, but I would say just being practical. I'm not sure if that's the word, practical, or just looking at what's happening in the world. I can see people more and more lonely, less and less mechanisms for getting people together, and less mechanisms for people getting together in a meaningful way that's not, how can I say, like people getting together for sports doesn't really connect them in a deep way. They connect them in a tribal way, like me against you, and I'm going to chant, I'm going to go, ooh, ooh, ooh. But you're not saying like, oh, how are you doing? What's important in your life today? Right? Which is what you would happen in a spiritual context. We always talk about like what's important. And we're not connecting in that beautiful way like we did in the past. Now that religion is kind of dying out in many Western countries. So what do you think about that?
There's actually that I really like the direction this conversation is going, just organically, and I'd like to just, without taking too much time, because I don't want to just take over here, but I'd like to just mention something that I often discuss on my own channel. Even though I am an agnostic, I actually believe that morality is objective, and I ultimately base this on that all human beings are equals, right? Which is why I believe I call you brother, even though I'm not a Muslim or a religious person at all. I still believe you are my brother. I believe all women are my sisters, all men are my brothers. I say to people that I don't have.
Beautiful. You're my brother as well. Yeah, carry on.
Sorry. Absolutely. I try to tell people that I don't have friends or enemies. I only have brothers and sisters. I have some brothers and sisters I really enjoy seeing, and I have other brothers and sisters I wish I could disown, but unfortunately you can't choose your family, right? And so we are all one species, and that's just how I view life. So in discussing this concept for objective morality with people, one of the arguments that I make in favor of objective morality is ultimately that every human being, every organic organism, frankly, but every human being wants to live a good life. In order to live a good life, one of the fundamental prerequisites is going to be self-respect. And if you don't respect others and don't understand the value that others bring to your life, then you cannot have self-respect. And you need self-respect to live this good life that you want. And unfortunately, what happens is we get on social media or we turn on the news or whatever it is, and we see that people are chasing drugs and alcohol, they're chasing sex, they're chasing fame and fortune, they're chasing money, they're chasing all of these things that I see as being this this mirage that you're talking about. It's not the key to the good life. The good life is very simple. It requires virtue. And if you live a virtuous life, and I don't necessarily mean virtue from religion, because I'm not a religious person. I get my concept of virtue from philosophy, from Aristotelian, the golden mean, and what Aristotle talked about, and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. This would be also his way of, he would define it maybe as the middle way that you get from the Eightfold Path, right? And so if you look at that perfect medium, that golden mean between excess and deprivation, from having too much or too little, that's where you find the virtue, where the virtue lies. So courage, for example, is an easy one to conceptualize for people. You have, at the far end, you have recklessness, and at the other end, you have fear. Right in between recklessness and fear is where you attain true courage. And you can look at everything in life, every situation in life, and find out what the virtuous action is, the virtuous cause or whatever, just by looking at the golden mean. And once you understand also that wisdom is the fundamental virtue, and I'll try and wrap this up here, but wisdom being the fundamental virtue that you need to understand even what I'm talking about with courage and fairness and justice and all the other virtues, right? So once you have wisdom, then you can start to really put all this together, and that's what you need to live the good life. Having money certainly helps, because it helps alleviate some stresses, and it allows you to do charitable things for people. When you have enough money, you can share your money and stuff. But self-respect can come from being in a destitute situation. I know people who live on the streets. When I was growing up on the streets, they had self-respect and they didn't have a roof over their head. I know people who were in prison for terrible crimes against people, and they had self-respect because they turned their life around, like I did when I was in prison. I know people who have been in all kinds of different situations, so on and so forth, that we would think there's no way this person could have a good life, but they did because they had self-respect. And there's actually books that have been written by people who went through concentration camps in Nazi Germany that came out and said, hey, I had self-respect and I lived a good life despite a situation we couldn't even imagine. So just wanted to touch on that really quick from my secular view of this mirage and this good life you mentioned.
Cool. Yeah, no, I like a lot of what you said, and I'm kind of interpreting it in my own way. Okay, so let me tell you how I agree with some of what you've got to say, and then I want to ask you something so I can understand it better as well. So Viktor Frankl is a really famous psychologist, and I would say a psychologist on happiness, but he would call it something more complicated. He's very well regarded in the kind of rankings of psychologists, and he said, to be happy, you just have to follow your conscience. Like every day, just listen to that, and if you do the right thing, you'll be happy. And I think self-respect and self-worth, this is kind of how I'm interpreting it, because that's what I've seen. If you have that, and you only have that when you do what you think is right consistently, then you actually like yourself. And you can't just stand in front of a mirror and keep repeating it like some people say, right? You've got to do the right thing. This is my experience, and this is what this guy Viktor Frankl says. Then you'll be happy. So I would agree about the self-respect thing, if it means self-worth and self-liking and all that kind of stuff, but only when you genuinely do the right thing and you automatically start liking yourself. And I love the balance thing. That's a very Islamic idea as well. And by the way, Buddhism in Islam, well, my understanding of Islam, everybody has been sent prophets and stuff. And Buddha, for me, is just another prophet of God. So it doesn't surprise me that we have lots of similarities between all the different religions. So yeah, balance, that's a really powerful idea. And I think I'm glad you shared that. I think anybody who has a balanced approach to life will really do well, I think. So yeah. So my question to you is, when you say, and I can agree with you with this, that you say ethics, or whatever the word is object, or how would you describe it? Ethics, or what was the word?
So yeah, I actually
morality.
Morality is really, when I first came up with the name objective ethics, it was because I believed there was a separation between ethics and morality, and there can be a conversation to be had about that. But ultimately, as I've been studying more and more philosophy, really you don't need to make that distinction. It's
Okay.
useful in certain terms, like we can say that we have like ethics in business, ethics in medical practices, so on and so forth. So there is a place for that. But ultimately, I'm talking about objective morality.
Cool. So I can, from the thing I just said about Viktor Frankl saying you just listen to your conscience and stuff like that, I do think there's a sort of objective morality that you can arrive at every day. Like you ask yourself this or that, like, is this the right thing to do, or should I go left, should I go right, sort of thing. And I can see that, right? So are you saying there is this truth out there, but despite this truth being out there, loads of people go in the wrong direction because it's not easy? Not everybody listens to their conscience, or not everybody's logical enough. Is that kind of what you're saying, that there is a truth out there, but not everybody follows it, sort of thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, brother. You're absolutely right. And I know it sounds very arrogant for somebody, especially like myself with my background. Who am I to come out here and tell people that they're misguided, right? But I do think that's unfortunately the case. And a lot of people who push back and say, well, no, morality is subjective. We make the rules up and we decide what's right and wrong and stuff. Well, there's a certain degree of truth to that, because all goals are going to be subjective, right? All values to goals are going to be subjective. The morality, what it is not a goal, right? People misunderstand this. Morality is an action, what we ought to do or ought not to do, right? So it's actually an action. And once you start to get people to understand the true definition of where morality sits, then you can say, okay, let's say the goal is human flourishing or cooperation, right? Which is what morality really deals with, is how do you get along in society? They call it social contracts, right? That's the realm of morality anyway. Well, once we say that the goal, we subjectively, individually as subjects with a stance and a mind, we decide to pick that goal of cooperation. Morality, because of the laws of nature which determine cause and effect, that's what gives us an objective actions that will help us reach that goal. So the more complicated thing is to try and parse out every single action in life and say, well, is murder wrong? Is stealing wrong? And blah, blah, blah. You go down the list, right? But there's a million different things that people engage in every day. So you have to say, is this right, wrong, or indifferent? There are simpler ways to conceptualize this, which is that kind of that middle ground I talked about. The other thing that helps make it simpler for people to understand is when it comes down to what justice is. A lot of people don't really understand what justice means. They think justice is the legal system, which it certainly does apply to the legal system, but justice comes from the word justification, which means you're able to epistemically justify your claim or your position or your action. And in order to have justice, a fundamental precondition of justice is fairness. And what fairness means is you treat like cases alike. Once we start to recognize what actually like cases alike are, it doesn't mean that, okay, one guy jumps over the fence because he wants to break into somebody's house and steal their TV and kick their dog or whatever. Another guy jumps over a fence because he sees a kid is drowning in the pool and wants to save that kid. So a lot of times people will stop at the action of jumping over the fence and say, well, they both jumped over the fence, we should judge them the same way. They're failing to understand that the one guy jumped over the fence to save the kid, the other guy jumped over the fence to break into the house. So those are not like cases. Even though they both jumped over the same fence, they're not like cases. True fairness means you gauge every single piece of the puzzle and say what it makes a like case. And then you judge like cases alike. That's fairness. And once you start to understand this, then you can understand how we're all equal. Like cases means we're all human beings, right? And so we all deserve at the very starting point to be treated with the same fairness, the same equality, to have the same rights, so on and so forth.
Sure. That's very, okay. So I would say that although there is an objective reality, it's very hard to get at unless you believe in a God or with a clear book and things like that. And let me explain that. So you talked about things like, let's start off with, so fairness, for example. Fairness is a really complicated idea. You said something that like two people jumping over a fence, and then some people miscategorize people like that although they both jumped over the fence, they're not the same category. What you started describing can quickly become very complicated. So deciding what is objective morality can be incredibly complicated. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, if you want to go through life and figure out what's the right way of life, it would take, to really figure it all out, it would take a lifetime just to figure it out. And then by the time you figured it out, you're dead. You would like to have some idea from near the beginning, like, so that you can live well. And that's what religion provides. And it's a tried and tested method that seems to have worked for thousands of years. And I say tried and tested, there's so many things that Islam says, like wash your hands, and even things like circumcision, which have been proved to be right, like fasting, which I'm going to be doing today, right? Incredibly healthy. Circumcision, for people who don't know, like chopping off the end of your penis, right? I mean, that's probably sounds wrong. Do search it up if you don't know what it is, but it's like being shown to protect from all sorts of diseases, sexual diseases, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many beneficial things in religion. So I would say, in short, it's what you're saying is really complicated to arrive at something that everybody agrees with. And that's another thing, like, you need everybody. If for a functional society, you can't have everybody constantly trying to figure out their objective morality. And in reality, everybody's going to come up with different ideas, and they'll be completely convinced that they followed logic. You'll be telling them that you have a superior understanding of logic, and they'll be telling you that they have a superior understanding of logic, and you'll have completely different solutions. And finally, you say everybody's to make the point even clearer, you say everybody is equal. Do you have any kids, by the way?
No, I don't.
Okay, right. So, and that kind of ties, the fact that you don't have any kids kind of ties into this whole thing that the clip I played in the beginning, because I know a lot of very successful people who don't have kids, and that's a big problem, I think, for the future. But if you did have kids, would you, let's say a 1-year-old baby, would you treat the 1-year-old baby the same way you would treat an adult?
No, because and that's a great analogy, and that, just to touch on that too, the reason that I don't have children isn't because I'm against people having children by any stretch of the imagination. Even though I do think we need to consider overpopulation, I'm not an antinatalist. Would be the term for people who thinks, well, there's antinatalism is a whole category of people. They think it's fundamentally immoral to have children. I don't believe that at all. The reason I don't have children, just as a quick touch on that, is because I believe, given my rough background, I've gone through so many broken homes, orphanages, and things like that. I ended up on the streets as a young teenager. I made an agreement with my wife when we decided to get married that we were not going to have children until we had enough money to where we owned a house and could support a child and showed that we could build a life for a child. By the time that I got my shit together, I was so old at that point. And by the time I started making enough money to where I could really support a child, that at that point, that ship had already sailed for us. You know what I mean?
How old are you? Roughly?
50, I think I just turned 51 here a couple weeks ago.
Still young. I'm 46, I think. What age? Yeah, 46 or 45. I'm 45. It's really weird how I can forget my age, but yeah, I think that's pretty young.
It gets worse as you get older.
Yeah,
it becomes kind of mean. It kind of
I have to keep calculating it. It's really weird.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying I'm too old to live life or too old to enjoy life, but too old to start raising children. You know what I mean? In my opinion, now kids, because even though I'm very strong and healthy right now, I exercise and go to the gym and do all the stuff I could do when I'm 30. That time is soon fading. By the time a child becomes, a young adult and wants to go play football or baseball or whatever, those kind of activities, I will be at that point. It'll be a struggle for me, So in fairness to the child, I just felt like by the time we started making enough money to provide the kind of life I would want to provide for a child, I just didn't think I just figured, like I said, that ship had sailed. So what I try to do is make other children's lives better by donating money, volunteering my time, being, setting a good example, hopefully in my community, so on and so forth. I think one of the things the Native Americans have a saying for it takes a village to raise a squaw. Are you familiar with that saying?
I mean, we have the English version. It takes a village to raise a child, but yeah,
right. Well, I think the
British
English version got it from the Native Americans. I think.
Oh, really?
I could be wrong.
Maybe.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that I'm sure that concept goes back. But this does bring up two things that you mentioned here, and I'll try and be brief here. One of them is the idea that this is extremely complex. And you're absolutely right about that, brother. It is complicated figuring out what is the right thing to do, because we have our egos. That's the biggest thing. Is an ego is not inherently a good thing or a bad thing, because without an ego, we wouldn't know what mouth to put the fork in, right? We have to have a certain amount of ego. Otherwise, we don't even sustain our own lives. So if you want to help other people, you have to help yourself so that you're in a position to be any good to other people. So you have to have this balance of ego. But the ego makes it very difficult to not prioritize ourselves too much, to where we are now at the center of our own attention and we become our own God, so to speak, right? So that's a really difficult thing for people to and it does take a lifetime to figure that out. So by the time you get to a position where you've got control over your own ego, now trying to get into figure out objective morality, you're right, it can take a lifetime, which is why I think there are interesting conversations to be had about reincarnation. Again, I'm not a religious person, but I do find the idea to be quite fascinating, because for true justice, for example, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but just true justice seems like karma, of all the religious models that I've heard, karma is extremely just. People literally get what they deserve, for good or for bad, according to the reincarnation model and certain senses of karma and stuff. So I do think you're right. You're touching on something that is important. Unfortunately, those are unfalsifiable claims. And so who really knows? But in my opinion, anyway. But you touched on something else, I think, that is relative here. And I think when we talk about how difficult it is to understand what is objective morality, human beings, Homo sapiens, from my understanding, have been on this planet for somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000 years. Anatomically correct Homo sapiens go back even further. So how long did it take us at 300,000 years before we ended slavery globally, or before we figured out the earth wasn't flat? I mean, these are relatively modern concepts, and we've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and it took us this long just to figure out some of the things that should be fundamentally basic. Equal human rights. It's a bad idea to own other people as property, like I own my car outside or my house or whatever, you know what I mean? It took us a long time to figure that out. It took us a long time to figure out that the earth is a sphere, an oblique spheroid. It's not flat. So I think the same thing can be said for this objective morality. I don't think it's unattainable knowledge. I really think at some point people will figure this out, but just because they haven't figured it out right now, I don't think that's but I do hear this all the time. Well, if there's a subjective morality, how come we don't know what it is, or how come people haven't figured it out yet? It's like, well, it takes time. This is a very complicated issue because it involves every human being as an individual participating in this collective, so to speak. So that is what I would say to that. I think there's a simple way to define it. Like, I try to make it as simple as possible so it's not intimidating to people, because as you pointed out, it gets complicated quick. You start talking about the guys jumping the fence, and pretty soon that one guy's doing one thing, one guy's doing another thing. So it does get complicated. But at the surface, it can be a lot more simple than people realize. If I say that I'm a human being, which means that I'm a moral agent, and what agency means is that I set goals and take actions. Being a human being is all it takes to be a moral agent. That means every single human being is a moral agent. In order to accomplish any of our goals, we need our freedom and well-being, which means every human being has an equal need for their freedom and well-being. Thus, every human being has a reason to have it. Thus, everyone ought to have it. If everyone ought to have their freedom and well-being, we ought not interfere with each other's freedom and well-being. They ought not interfere with ours. This starts to help us to conceptualize what true equality really looks like. And if I'm living my life in total consideration of everybody next to me, and they're also reciprocating this to me, the problems fix itself. My father was murdered when I was a kid. One of the reasons I went through so many broken homes. And people have asked me, if you could just snap your fingers and get rid of all the guns in the world, would you do it? And my answer has always consistently been no, because that doesn't solve the problem. Because as soon as you get rid of the guns, then the people will start killing each other with chainsaws or axes or blowtorches or whatever they've got, right? Flamethrowers. If you get rid of the violence, the gun problem takes care of itself. right? So we have to learn to get to the root of these problems. And with this objective morality, understanding true equality, I think it gets us right to the root of the problem, in my opinion. And I'll turn it back over to you here.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate you try to shrink everything you've got to say in as short time as possible, and hopefully we have more of these conversations. I want to say to you, because this is really important, the number one audience for me right now is you, and I would feel bad if I didn't say this. I recommend you do have kids and get started immediately. And the reason is that when you get old, there's no connection that means as much and is as special as blood, your own kids. And I mean, they've got to stick with you and talk. There's no point having it'll be sad to have kids that don't talk to you in your old age. But that's I won't delve into it too much, but I would say that. And that builds into that brings us back to the whole idea of morality and the right thing and whatever. Like, we think we can be convinced of something is being right for a long time, and then when it's really too late, we might figure it out. It's like, for example, having kids, and maybe you're like maybe 80 years old and it's too hard to have kids or something. And then you realize you want kids, or you're all alone, and you might think that being alone is a good thing, and you don't have a wife or a girlfriend or something to have kids with. And then when it's too late, you realize the truth, as it were. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's a nice theory, but it's a really dangerous theory that in reality, I think a lot of people will suffer from, like trying to figure things out from scratch. And I do think there's an objective reality, and that's from God, and it's provable, but we'll have a conversation about that. And actually, you know what? I'll touch on how it's provable. What the Quran does to make it so really simple and easy to know what objective reality is kind of two things. Firstly, it will say all sorts of scientific miracles that can't have been known when it was written at a time, and you can judge for yourself, and you go, oh, okay, this must be from God, and then the rest must be from God. So that's one way of looking at it. And then the actual teachings themselves, again and again, prove themselves to be really helpful to your life. So those are my thoughts on that. Like, objective reality, you need it as soon as possible. It can be attained. Trying to attain it yourself can really be harmful to yourself. So just react to the fact that I think you should have kids. What do you think?
Well, as far as me having children personally, no, I've pretty well set it in my direction I'm going in my life. And I have a wife to consider as well. She's got her own opinion about the situation, right? But
Yeah.
I do think one thing I would like to do is because first of all, I want to commend you for taking the time and energy to try to coach up young men, because this is important. And that's not because men are more important than women. That's, me, I prior to this conversation, I believe that all human beings are equal, but young men do have certain, as men and women, biologically, we serve different roles. And this is not, I'm not talking about fundamentally in the household. I want to be very clear about that. And I'm not saying if people want to live in a traditional household where the man's the boss or whatever, that's up for you guys to decide for yourselves. That's not how I live my life. My wife and I are literally equal partners. We don't have nobody rules the home. I like to joke with her and tell her it's my castle and I'm the king, but all in jest. So what I would say is that men and women still fundamentally need to fill different roles in society. We want the men, we don't want to be fighting wars, but if we have to have police officers, right, we want the men to strong because they're physically stronger, not because they're better than the women, and things like that. Firefighters, same thing. And this, again, I believe women are, I have taught martial arts, instruct as a student instructor and whatnot, and I've taught women who are very tough. I've seen women kick the crap out of boys. However, I've also played a lot of sports and coached a lot of sports. Men, on average, are faster, stronger, jump higher, and that's just a fact. It's not because I'm trying to be sexist against women, but this is just a biological reality of the way that men and women grow up. And there are some exceptions to the rule. There's some great female athletes out there. I'm sure there's some great female firefighters and great female cops and so on and so forth. And there may be certain roles in the fire company or in the police company that women would feel no problem, like an interrogation room or something like that, But as far as getting out there and doing certain jobs, men do have certain abilities, biologically speaking. And I think that's just a fact. And so to take time, I think it's important because I think that men, when it comes to society and the pressures, especially for young men that get put on them, can be overwhelming. And I think I don't know if we're going to have time to get into it today, but I think one of the topics you brought up was self-deletion. I don't know how you couch the language around here, but you know what I mean? Like,
suicide?
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you say that. I don't know. On YouTube, I think they don't like people saying that, but I don't know how you do it or not. But yeah.
Okay, I'll try to save self-deletion then.
Yes, I'm just so used to, just couching certain terms and stuff. But so, that is an issue. And I think that, the way that we're raising our young people, men and women. So I really applaud you for focusing on that because it's really important. And I think that is one of the ways that you can make the world a better place by helping young men become good men when they're older.
Yeah.
So that's as far as having children to just address that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate all the points you just made there. So I'll just briefly say the reason why I focus on young men is because it seems to be, this is something like Jordan Peterson brought to my attention when he was going through the statistics of people who watch his videos. It's just that it's usually young men that watch these kind of videos, and women seem to, maybe it's true or not, but from my own experience, women seem to learn in a different way, not through YouTube videos of this kind. So that's one reason, and I'm a man and I can relate to it. The way I express things and the way men generally understand, like very blunt often and direct and whatever. So that's why I think works. And and I think it's that you can't talk to everybody at the same time. Everybody's different. So that's one reason. So let me try to jump into some of the questions I had lined up because it'll be interesting to see what you've got to say about them. And I'll kind of post them on the screen as well. Oops, is it showing? There we go. And what do you really want in life?
Well, I want to live a good life, which means to have self-respect, which means to treat others with respect. And in order to treat others with respect, I need to understand what respect is in general, right? Which means making the right choice at the right time and hopefully for the right reason.
Why do you want those things? Like what makes you feel that that's what you want? You want self-respect. Like, why is that a thing? Like, people want a car or a house, they want a family. What makes you think, how did you come? It sounds like you thought about it a lot and you kind of narrowed it down to that. So that's pretty interesting. Why self-respect out of all the things?
Yeah, and I think, well, I have had the benefit, even though I'm only 51 years old, I have had the benefit of living a very full life. I've done so much in my life. I've experienced so many highs and lows that fortunately most people won't have to go through. And that's good because some of those lows, when you hit rock bottom, it's rough down there. And so I've had a full life, and it's given me an opportunity to reflect on a lot of different things and see things from different angles. And once I understood that everybody, including myself, ultimately wants to live a good life. And this just touches on what I said earlier. I know we all want to live a good life. It's just counterintuitive and incoherent to say that some person wants to live a bad life. It makes perfect sense to understand that people do a lot of dumb things, in my opinion, trying to live this good life. But that's not because they don't want to live the good life. They just don't understand what it takes to live the good life. So I believe that I have finally come to understand what it really takes to live this good life, which is to be a virtuous person and to attain self-respect, strive for this self-respect. And self-respect, as I said before, requires the virtues, which one of them is justice. And in order to have justice, to be able to justify my claims, to justify my actions, I need to be treating things fairly, situations and people fairly, which means like cases alike. So I break everything down to this, and which is why I don't worry about religion or beliefs of that nature. I believe that if there is a God out there, and if this is a good God, then a person who attains self-respect by living the good life that I'm talking about, which is to treat people with fairness, I don't think I have anything to worry about in the afterlife, to be honest with you. And I don't mean to sound arrogant with that, but I think that this is the best that I could do with what I've been given. And so maybe somebody can show me, because I'm certainly willing to be proven wrong. I am a skeptic, and I have had to apologize to people before for being wrong, and I've had to apologize to my wife and my friends and my employees at work. You know, I've had to go and tell them. I've had to be humble, right? And that's good. When people can push back on our ideas, which is what I do with my channel. I invite religious people, not religious people, people with different political views, because my goal with my channel is to not become a YouTuber or some kind of internet personality. My goal is to try to teach people how to have respectful disagreements. And that's what I'm really trying to bring people together with different ideas.
Wow, I love that so much. From a Muslim point of view, you don't have to be Muslim to go to heaven, because you can be a bad Muslim, and also you might not have been told the correct understanding of Islam, and so therefore you justifiably not follow it, etc. And so God decides in my understanding of Islam, but it's not mutually like following a religion, and like you could, and I think you kind of said what I'm about to say, kind of thing, which is like you could be wrong, and if say Islam is explained to you in a proper way and you think it's the right thing, it would make sense to follow it. So it's not like you have to be outside religion your whole life. Is that right? Like if religion made sense to you, like how do I say it? Like you said, if there's a God would accept you even if you didn't follow religion. I would say it's not mutually exclusive from you actually eventually following religion. If you realized religion was from God and God just wanted to help you out, does that kind of make sense? And you followed it eventually.
I think so. No, I have to admit that I haven't looked into Islam as much as the other two Abrahamic religions. I have studied world religions quite a bit. It actually was one of the primary things that I studied when I was in college for all my elective classes. And I even attended a Christian Bible seminary. Now, I did not sign a statement of faith because I was never a Christian. I was always agnostic, but I was able to do what they call audit classes, which is where you pay extra money and you can sit in on the classes, but you don't get any credit hours and you can't get any degrees or anything like that, but you can get the information, right, from the source. So I actually spent way too much money, taking college classes at Christian colleges because of how fascinated I am with religion. Because really, I'm a history buff, and I love socialism essentially, which is where we're trying to, not socialism. That's not a good way to say it, because that's a political term. Society, social development, community, and how do cultures evolve over time, right? Not biologically, but in social evolution, we call it, right? So communities grow and they become big cities, and big cities become big states become big countries, so on and so forth. And so religion historically has been tied intrinsically to these growths of governments, what become governments and countries, right? Which is why we have what people consider to be Christian nations or Islamic nations, so on and so forth. So to try to study history absent of religion, in my opinion, just seems kind of like a fruitless study, because they're just so tied together. And in my studies of world religions, one of the things that I have found is there are some things that seem to be at the core of every religion. And it's really boils down to what we call reciprocity, or they might call it the golden rule, so to speak, right? Do unto others, you would have them do unto you. This actually goes back, it predates historically the organized Abrahamic religions from a historical perspective, all the way into even pre-Babylonian Ugaritic texts talk about this. We have this in ancient Sumer, this idea of reciprocity. And given that that's when the written record starts, and at that point, Sumer was already a fully developed functioning city, an empire, basically all relatively speaking for what it was, we know that this idea goes back way further than that, thousands, tens of thousands of years, probably. So these are not what the religions are trying to do, in my opinion, is try to organize this information in a way that's more tangible to a particular group of people. But there are this core thread that ties all these religious beliefs together. Now, there's obviously some stark differences when you start talking about Allah, true monotheism versus a Trinitarian type of Christianity that, you know what I mean? I mean, there's obviously going to be some fundamental disagreements here. But at the core level, what I see as the outside observer who doesn't have a particular bias towards one religion or the other, is that there's this core message. And so this life that I'm talking about living aligns with this core message. And we actually refer to it as humanism, to be honest with you. This is what humanism, secular humanism, is really striving for, is this core message of reciprocity.
Sure. I mean, call it, no, I don't mind calling it humanism or anything. I just want to say, I appreciate how you keep saying my brother. It's a beautiful thing. Over here in the Arabic world, like, that's how you refer to everybody, like, everybody's my brother. I love that. What was the other thing? I think at the source of all religions, if you go to the origins of all the teachings, they're pretty much the same. And I think more than reciprocating, you know, if you do something good to me, I'll do something good to you, etc. Religion often teaches do more than that. That's another thing. Cool. So that's really interesting. And generally, I love your humility as well. It's really nice. I mean, to even apologize to people you work who are working under you, as it were, and stuff like that. I think that's a beautiful and positive way to move forward, because we can easily get stuck in believing we're right. But if we're humble, we can always move forward. And I think we benefit from being humble, so that we're not shackled by trying to be right all the time. And I've been wrong loads of times. Like, yeah, I've been atheist, I've been different things. I actually, as a Muslim, I think it's good to go to churches and different faith backgrounds and talk to different groups of people all the time. So cool. So I think we agree on that. Another quick, I know we've got like 15 minutes maximum. I definitely don't want to go and beyond that time. We can just cut off anytime you feel like you want to go. So do tell me, like, do you want to go now?
No, I am watching the clock here. I think we do have time to get into a little bit. I do definitely, in 15 minutes, I do have to, because I promised, speaking of my employees, I've got stuff at work I've been dealing with their schedule, and I need to be in communication with each of them individually, so they don't feel like they're being disrespected or disregarded. But I had to make some tough choices, and unfortunately, it just is the way it is. But I like to have that FaceTime with them, because it is respect. Because whether you're running a company or running a family, or just a member of a neighborhood or a church or whatever it might be, I do believe that the thing that I tell the managers underneath myself, and I try to teach people, if they're going to run a business in particular, you must lead by example. You must, if you want them to be humble and be open to information, new information, you've got to lead by that example. If you want them to be hardworking, you've got to be the hardest working person in the building. You know, it's getting to the working way to the top doesn't mean that's when you start slacking off. A lot of people, I see this, and this is one thing I do see in America as being a big problem, is that there are a lot of people who are looking at the man, quote unquote, and they think that these corporate, these CEOs of companies are just out on the golf course all the time, and they're making millionaires, make too much money, they don't deserve all that money. And it's really unfair, because it shows a lack of understanding of what it takes to become a millionaire. It shows a lack of understanding of what it really means to be a CEO of a successful business, to have a publicly traded company, so on and so forth. They just don't have the understanding. They think that the working class guy is the one that makes it all happen, but that's simply just not true. And the working class guy does have a value and does play a very important role, but to just hand wave away leadership as if they're not doing anything, just sitting around, you know what I mean, just doing whatever it is they think that people are doing with their days and not actually working. And there are going to be leaders who do that, obviously. Uh-oh, looks like I lost you. Whoa, there he is. Okay. I thought, I didn't know if that was the rapture or what was going on there.
You know what? I don't know. It might be, it sometimes happens on my channel. I'm not sure if it's my connection cut out for a second. I don't know. Or it could just be restream maybe is not as good as I think. So maybe the videos. Are you still there, by the way?
I am. Yep.
Okay. I've got a feeling, even though it doesn't say end stream, that maybe it got cut off, and maybe that's a good thing. I never worry about anything, right? So we could make this the last question in case we're not actually being recorded. And I don't want you to be like rushing to the next thing anyway. So let's make this the last question, because I like to be easygoing, and I'm hoping we're going to have loads more of these streams anyway. So what's the rush, right?
That sounds good,
so
yeah.
Cool. So let's make this the last question. And I think it kind of in some way might summarize everything we've discussed in some ways. Like, do you think we often chase short-term goals and only realize they're empty when we achieve them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do 100%. I think this is one of the biggest problems is that people are what we call short-sighted, and they're short-sighted in their vision, their goal setting, and what they actually choose to focus on. And just in general, they're not looking at very similar to what I think this is a great question you've lined up, because it really actually harkens back to what we were talking about in my example about fairness. When I gave the example of fairness, and people say, well, you got the two guys jumping the fence, and then they go on and one guy breaks in the house and the other guy saves the kid in the pool. The short-sightedness says these are the same situation because both people are jumping the fence, but that's only the beginning of the story. It doesn't get you to the end of the story, which is the most important part, to understand which guy is good and which guy is bad, and how these situations are not fair. They're not alike cases alike. You're not looking at it fairly. If you have a short-sightedness and you're only looking at the action of the two guys jumping over the fence, you're missing the boat entirely.
Yeah. And I think it's important to constantly realize that we could be suffering from that same problem.
I agree. Well, here's the problem with it, brother, is you have evolution works in basically three ways. Okay. And I'm perfectly fine positing a theistic model of evolution where there's a God that kicks everything off. I've got no problem with that. As long as we can, I have a difficult time talking to people who deny science, because I don't know how to communicate with them, if you know what I mean, and have common ground. But if we can accept evolution, whether it's theistic evolution or naturalistic evolution, I don't care for this example. Evolution works in three ways. You have biological evolution, you have social evolution, and then you have technological evolution. The biological evolution takes hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, even billions of years to work. It's a very slow process. Social evolution grows significantly faster. Even though it's taken us a few 100,000 years to get rid of slavery, it took us, into getting, that's really not fair, because we didn't have societies and slaves until, so slavery didn't even really come around until we started having cities and civilizations, right? So it took us a couple thousand years to get rid of slavery. But that's still very quickly compared to how long it took us to evolve as Homo sapiens, right? Then you look at technological evolution, and technological evolution grows at an exponential rate, right? It grows way faster than social evolution. So what this means is that while all three of these things are happening at the same time, the rates are significantly different. And so ultimately it means that we are able to produce things like technologies much, much faster than we're able to sit back and say, hey, is this a good idea or a bad idea? Because the rates are different, right? So our abilities way outpace our ability to produce things in machinery and technology, way outpaces our ability to think about the ethics. And how that relates to what you're talking about here is this short-sightedness, right? We can build combustible engines, and we hit the Industrial Revolution, and we had built an entire global economy around burning fossil fuels. Suddenly now we're starting to look back and say, oh man, you know what? Maybe that wasn't such a good way to go, because we are destroying the atmosphere. We're destroying the climate. And that we can't just stop burning fossil fuels overnight, because we will crash the global economy. Billions of people will die because they won't have power, they won't have heat, they won't have access to food and all this other stuff, because it's all tied to burning the fossil fuels. So this short-sightedness of, look how amazing this is, that I can go from a horse-drawn wagon to a steam engine to a car to a big semi-truck to now freight liners that are cargo ships that are transporting all these products. We could do this so quickly, relatively speaking. And now all of a sudden it's like, man, you know what? Looking back at this, maybe that wasn't the best route to go. So this short-sightedness bites us in the butt all the time.
And you described it from like a macro level, society level, where society thinks, oh, we should use this technology, for example, and then realizes 100 years later maybe it was a bad idea. But I think even as an individual level, coming back to your idea of that we can achieve objective morality within our lifetimes, possibly, I would say constantly realizing that if everybody else is making, or most people are making mistakes, and realizing much later on that they made a mistake, we could be doing that. And that's what the big problem with trying to achieve objective morality is. So I'd like you to respond to that, and then we'll finish off. But the good thing is, since we've got Claire, our common friend, commenting, it looks like we haven't gone offline, so that's good. But you respond to that, please, and then we'll finish off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really appreciate this conversation, but we'll give closing remarks here in a minute. But no, you're right about this. And this is why it's so important to have strong leaders, and why things like the written record are so important for our advancement, because we are able to pass along this information. So the things that you and I discussed today, the fact that the internet is forever, as they say, right? Younger generations, people who you're coaching up, these young men, for example, is a perfect example of how this can benefit them. They can receive this information, and maybe they'll say, hey, you know what, this objective ethics guy, he's onto something here, but we're going to discard some of this other stuff. We're just going to take these pieces here, and they're going to build their own model and improve upon what I'm talking about and improve upon what you're teaching them. They're going to take the good stuff and then get rid of the stuff that they find out is unnecessary or needs to be tweaked. Then they're going to improve it, and then they're going to pass that on to the next generation, and so on and so forth. And it is a very slow process. As I said, social evolution, while it's much faster than biological evolution, relatively, it's much slower than technological evolution. So we can kind of use those to gauge the speed at which this happens, right? But prophets like the Muhammad, the Jesus prophet, the Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha prophet, I can totally appreciate that type of terminology. I think Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, another great prophet. If you want to use the word prophet, I could apply Abraham Lincoln. Could almost be seen as this type of a prophet, teaching about trying to abolish slavery and really the Civil War movement and what he really stood for. Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, we could go on and on and on and think about all these great leaders that we've had, we've been exposed to, and we only know about them through history books and this message being passed over time. So the best that you and I can do is, one, live by example, and to try and share our message, and to be humble about it, to realize that people can come along and say, hey, you know what, you need to tweak it a little bit. This is where you're missing the boat. We need to say, okay, and then move forward with that new information. And again, this is all about just leading by example.
Cool. I don't want to take any more of your time. I absolutely love this conversation. Really looking forward to more of these conversations. What I loved about it is we were actually listening to each other and learning from it. I don't know about learning, probably learning. I think I probably gained something from it, right? We were listening to each other and not like ignoring each other or competing with each other, but like just adding to what the other person said. And I thought it was a great conversation. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
I think this is how all conversations should go, because it was very respectful, and it's got to start there. I think one of the things that you touched on, there's probably a lot more that you had in mind to talk about, and I do want to have another conversation with you. I'd like to invite you to come over to my channel, same time, same day, on a Wednesday, and we'll do it on my channel. But I want to get into the community, because you mentioned that at the beginning of this about how communities without religion, what are people doing? And I think that that's a very important topic, because there's a lot of truth to that community, religion does provide this sense of community, this bond, your local softball team and that type of thing. So maybe next time we can put a pin in that, and that will be a place to jumpstart it for the next conversation. But if you don't mind a selfish plug, please do check out my YouTube channel at Objective Ethics. I'm sure you're going to link it to this video. And I do appreciate the time that you've offered to me. I'm very grateful for that.
I'm very grateful for your time. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Catch you another time. Peace be upon you. Bye.
Okay, everybody. So that was the conversation, a lovely chat I had with this gentleman, Khalid. As you heard, we're probably going to end up doing like a at least a part 2 on this. I think we really just barely scratched the surface of this fascinating topic. Is the West lost and dying? And this coming from, he's coming from a Muslim perspective, a theistic perspective, and I'm obviously coming from the agnostic, secular, humanist perspective. And I think there's some really interesting things that we need to touch on to kind of parse that whole thing out and get into it. So I'm looking forward to, at the very least, a part 2 of this. I think the part 2 he's agreed we're going to do on my channel, and that will definitely make it easier for me to get that live streamed when it actually happens, as opposed to having to replay it like this. But I do want to just reach out I want to just say thank you to Khalid. The brother was very gracious for allowing me to come onto his channel, his platform there, and speak openly about my secular views. And I appreciate him. Not everybody in these circles is willing to have these respectful conversations, to give people equal time and equal opportunity to share their views when they're conflicting with whatever the channel is trying to promote per se. So he's got a channel that's focused on Islam, obviously. My channel is focused more on the general secular humanist, objective morality, things of that nature. So while there is some crossover there, as you saw, we were able to find common ground. And I'm actually running up against the clock here today. I was really hoping to open up this floor just for a few minutes to let you guys kind of share your thoughts, but I just don't know. I just don't know if I have time before I go to work. I might be able to do it for like 5 minutes. I will post this link just on the off chance that you guys want to have a couple things to say, but I need to keep it very brief. I don't even know if I should really do this. Where am I even at here? Let's see. That's not what I want to do. That is not what. That's what I want to do. Okay. This is turning into a hot mess already. Okay, how do I do this? Is the West lost or dying? Let me go here. Let me go to the chat real quick and post this link. We're going to have like 5 minutes to do this. I really, I don't even know if anybody's actually even still watching this, but just in case. Okay. This is going to be very, very quick, you guys. I do need you to be respectful of the fact that I've got to get out to work. Just going to leave this open for a couple minutes in case somebody has something brilliant they want to add. I do want to point out 2 things that I said in this. I kind of meant tongue in cheek. It just kind of seemed to go unnoticed, but I thought it was hilarious when the first comment that I made when I was talking about women in the police force, and I said they'd be good at doing interrogations. Oh man, that was golden. The other thing I thought that was hilarious is when he disappeared for a quick second and came back, and I mentioned that he had just gotten raptured, even though he's a Muslim, and that's Christian theology, and the look on his face, that was priceless. Okay, I don't see anybody jumping in right quick, and I do have to get out of here, so I'm just going to go ahead and shut this down. I really appreciate that you guys have stopped by to watch this conversation. Please do stay tuned for part 2. Remember that next week, this Sunday, we have Dr. Richard Carrier coming on, and that'll be a really good show talking about objective morality. I might get into the mythicist a little bit with him, mythicism, I should say, if we have time at the end of our discussion on objective morality. And then also, I need to keep remembering to plug the ARC protest. They lost a major financial sponsor, so the show is still running and still planning on going and everything, and they're still plugging along. But they definitely need any financial support that you guys can offer. So I will come back into this video and I will plug the link for that PayPal account. It goes 100% of that goes to the event. It's the ARC Encounter protest event. If you do make a donation, please let me know so that I can give you guys a shout out in the comments. They also have, I think, some small gifts they're going to be giving to people who have made donations. So I really appreciate any support that you guys do for that event. And again, the 100% of those funds do go to the ARC protest. I'm not taking anything off the top. In fact, I'm making my own donations. I've got a show scheduled to do a promotion for the event, some kind of a charity event that we're going to do on my channel here, I think mid-June. and I'll be donating a few $100s to that myself. So I appreciate all the support that you guys will give to that event. I think it's very important. That Ark encounter is a real tragedy in many ways, economically, just politically. It's not right for taxpayers to be funding that monstrosity. And the biggest issue with me is teaching children that this global flood myth is actual history. There's so many problems with that as far as that goes. Ethically, I think that's a terrible thing. So thank you so much for checking in, and I will look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern, as always.
Channel. 3.30 through repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deconverted, what do you do? Can't you feel that oh shit, he just ran! Just wait, objective ethics will be on your plate.